Hey golfers, this is Coach Josh. Welcome back to the channel. Today's topic is all about flexibility and mobility. Are they one and the same or are they different? Most people, when they say they need to get more flexible, they might just be feeling tight, especially in their golf swing, and they might be feeling like they can't get to their follow through or can't make a full turn. I just need to get more flexible is one of the most common things I hear. Well, there is a huge difference between flexibility and mobility. When we talk about generally flexibility, we're talking about someone's passive range of motion. So there's a difference between passive range of motion and an active range of motion. Those are two completely different things. So when I'm talking about mobility, I really want to know what someone's active range of motion is like. And then when I talk about flexibility, we're often talking about what someone's passive range of motion is like. So I'm going to illustrate the difference between the two of those things for you. I'm going to show you on the floor here. This is probably the easiest way to explain it. Passive range of motion is when an outside force is going to bring your joint into a range of motion. So if imagine someone was, held my leg down here straight and they pushed my foot up as high as they would go, keeping my knee straight. I'm feeling a big stretch there, right down the back of my hamstring. But that's about as, without me kind of losing posture, that's probably about, my passive range of motion. So there's an outside force. I'm putting this force through the band into my foot to pull my leg up. You can see that's about the end range of my passive range of motion. So that's kind of my flexibility. My active range of motion would be doing an active straight leg raise exercise where I'm trying to actually use the muscles in this hip, and I also got to use my core muscles to keep my back stable to try and bring this leg up as high as I can. So you can see there is a difference there, okay, between how far I can lift my leg using the muscles around this hip. I've got access to this much active range of motion. If I bring an outside force into it, I can probably get that leg from here to there. Okay, so there's a difference, but it's not huge. If you have a really big difference between your active and your passive ranges of motion, that's where, again, you probably aren't as strong as you need to be in your end ranges, and you need more active mobility or active range of motion control. So it's a lot of work in the end ranges of motion. And this is where static stretching does not benefit us as much, like I was holding my leg up there with the strap. I would much rather see people, if you had to pick one or the other, doing a controlled active straight leg raise where we're keeping this quad active, using the hip flexor to actually hinge the hip. Now, while we do need a hip hinge in golf, rotation is probably a little more important because golf is a rotary sport. So I'm going to show you a couple active and passive ways you can increase your rotation in two of the most common areas we see people struggle in terms of rotation. That is in the hips and the shoulders. So if you aren't 100% sure if you're struggling, which areas you need more mobility, go ahead and click on the link in the description and you'll see our free home assessment where you can take our home mobility test and find out where you need more active range of motion, and then you can apply these exercises or drills. So our first one, we're going to take a look at the hips, because our hip rotation, again, is probably our most commonly failed mobility test. So when we're looking at hip rotation, we're specifically looking at internal range of motion. So when I'm internally rotating the hip, it looks like this. I'm taking this hip socket here and I'm rotating it inwards. We want to see from a seated position about 40 degrees range of motion internally rotating the hip. Now, a active range of motion, if I was going to internally rotate my left hip, trying to get it actively rotating, I'm going to maybe lean forward a little bit in this 90-90 position and try and actively rotate and get that hip to turn down towards the floor. I'm not just trying to pick my foot up like this off the floor. A lot of people will often bend their knee to try and do that, okay? You want to actually feel like you're rolling your thigh down and in towards the ground and turning your kneecap and thigh down and towards the ground. You can see I'm actually rotating that hip in towards the midline. That's the internal rotation we're talking about. And I really feel a strong contraction in that muscle. If you're trying this at home and you cramp up, which is not uncommon, it's typical if you're really weak in the TFL muscles, that is your tensor fasciae lata. It's your primary internal hip rotator, that muscle. So if it's weak and unconditioned and you try and get it into end range like I'm doing here, and that muscle has not been asked to do that in a long time, it's probably going to cramp up on you. So there is a way we can work around that. We can train this range of motion eccentrically. So that just means we're going to use the passive range of motion to get you. I'm going to take this band, put it around my foot. I'm going to lean forward a little bit. So now this band can lift me, and keep your knee 90 degrees as you can see here, but now I'm using this band as a little bit of help, and I'm going to try and slowly let go of this band and lower my leg from the top down, and I really feel that muscle working in here to try and resist the weight of gravity or my leg coming from the top down. So again, we assist into that end range. So again, you can see my passive range of motion is way greater than my active range. So I want to narrow those two down. So I get into my end range passively with this assistance, and I'm going to slowly work down and lower the leg. So I'm just letting this band slide in my hand and slowly lower, and I really feel that contraction deep in this hip. So that's going to strengthen the internal hip rotators eccentrically. So while the muscle's lengthening out, it's having to work. It's a great way to train your range of motion. And you can do about 6 to 10 of those, actively, slowly lowering yourself down. Initially, you might only be able to get to here, but then as you continue, you might be able to get a little bit higher up and control that movement, and we feel that deep in here. So now that I've gotten that end range of motion trained, when I go back into position here, I can definitely feel a strong contraction here, and I'm able to get a little more range internally with that hip. That's my active range of motion. The next one we're going to jump to is the shoulders. So shoulders are very commonly one of the areas where we need external rotation in the shoulder. So for a right-handed golfer, it's the right shoulder that would be the trail shoulder. This is the one where we need to be able to stay in golf posture and get this forearm more vertical than your spine. That's going to allow me to sort of shallow the club down here. If you struggle with an over-the-top move, this is going to be a big, big one for you. So most golfers, if they are over the top, they're going to see that slice. We need to have that external range of motion in the shoulder in terms of rotation to shallow the club on the way down. So a big way we do that is by actually taking the shoulder. I'm going to take this elbow, it's 90 degrees, and I can assist myself into external range of motion. So I'm just taking that golf club, putting it above my elbow, taking the elbow at 90 degrees, and from here I'm going to use this hand here to just assist myself into an end range of motion. Again, this is passive mobility. I'm just getting a bit of a stretch here, and I feel that, right? But that's not going to necessarily train me to get more end range of motion actively. It's just going to open this end range up a little bit passively, but that's not going to train my muscles to get there. So what we can do to increase that end range of motion and active mobility, we can just take a chair here. I like doing this because it kind of just takes any balance out of it. You're not standing, you're not leaning forward in your golf posture. You're just supported by the chair in an all-fours position. You can do this standing with your elbow against a wall as well. But I find it's easier to feel what your shoulder blade is doing here. So from here, I'm going to take that shoulder blade, elbow's 90 degrees straight out from my armpit, but I'm going to slide that shoulder blade. See how I'm bringing it down away from my ear. That's really key, that you have that control in your scapula and shoulder. That's another one. We want active control of this shoulder blade, because if I can control that, now you'll see I can actually rotate that shoulder externally. If my shoulder blade creeps up and I don't have good control, active mobility in my shoulder blade, that's as far as I can rotate it up. You can see because my shoulder blade's out of place, it's hiked up. So make sure you get that shoulder blade down here. That's why I like this option on the chair, because it's much easier to feel this while you're in this all fours or quadruped position. So pack the shoulder blade down first, and then we're going to roll your elbow, rotate your elbow down into the chair. You can see that's bringing my forearm off the floor, but I'm really rotating from my shoulder joint, okay, where my upper arm bone, my humerus sits in the shoulder blade, and then I come back down. So I'm not trying to lift the hand up. Most of the time, this most common mistake I see people make is a lot of wrist extension here. They're just trying to get the hand back there. This is not a hand or wrist movement. This is a shoulder movement. So flip your palm in, keep your wrist dead flat. There should be no bending or flicking back of your wrist. And just roll your elbow down into the chair, and you'll see your bicep tries to roll up towards the ceiling. Hold that end range and really squeeze it. So really squeeze right in the back of your shoulder here. You should feel that muscle, infraspinatus, is that main shoulder external rotator really rotating. Come back down, hold that end range, hold it, and then come back down. Okay, you can also have a small, 1 to 2 pound weight in your hand. That would help as well. But starting in this quadruped position is a great way to do it. That's going to help you increase that active range of motion in the hips and the shoulders. I hope you guys found these exercises really helpful, and I'll see you guys next time.